I can't lend you money, my brother refused. You're on your own now, I texted while removing him from my will. The phone buzzed against my kitchen counter as rain lashed against the windows of my modest two-bedroom home. I glanced at the screen, wiping flour from my hands onto my apron. Mom's recipe for lemon squares was spread out on the counter, her handwriting faded but still legible. For Evie's 30th birthday, she had written at the top, though that birthday had passed 15 years ago. I still made them every year on that day. The caller ID made my heart skip. Darren. For years of silence broken by a simple vibration against granite. I stared at his name, watching it pulse with each ring, debating whether to pick up or let it slide into voicemail oblivion. My brother. The ghost who'd vanished when our mother needed us most. I answered on the final ring. Hello. My voice sounded smaller than I intended, and I hated myself for it. Evie, you picked up. Darren's voice was warm, enthusiastic, as if we'd spoken yesterday. As if he hadn't missed our mother's decline, her death, and the 4 birthdays I'd celebrated alone since then. How've you been, sis? I leaned against the counter, flour dust rising in the soft afternoon light filtering through the kitchen window. Outside, my small garden, Mom's garden, really, glistened with raindrops, the flowers bowing under their weight. For years, Darren. I didn't answer his question. 4 years without a single call. A pause. I could almost see him running his hand through his hair, a habit since childhood when caught in a lie or an awkward position. Yeah, I know. Things have been complicated. He chuckled nervously. I've been all over the place. Thailand for a while, then Argentina. I was building some business connections in Dubai when Mom died. The words fell flat between us. Another pause, longer this time. I was at the funeral, Evie, for all of 2 hours. I closed my eyes, seeing him in his expensive charcoal suit, hugging distant relatives, accepting condolences as if he'd been there through it all. As if he'd held her hand through chemo treatments or learned how to change IVs at home. As if he'd been the one to hear her last breath while rain, like today's, tapped softly against the hospice window. Look, I didn't call to rehash old. Why did you call, Darren? I cut him off, suddenly exhausted. The lemon squares would have to wait. The batter sat untouched in the mixing bowl. He cleared his throat. I need a favor, sis. Just a small one. Of course. I almost laughed. For years of silence broken not by an apology, not by genuine concern for my well-being, but by need. His need. Always his need. Hey sis, I need a favor. That's how it always started with Darren. In high school, when he needed me to cover for him with our parents. In college, when he needed money for spring break, while I worked 2 jobs to help Mom with bills. And now, after abandoning us during Mom's illness, he needed something again. What kind of favor? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Money. He said it quickly, like ripping off a band-aid. Just a loan. I've hit a rough patch and... A rough patch, I repeated, my voice hollow. My business venture in Dubai didn't pan out, and I had to leave some complicated situations behind. I'm back in the States now, trying to get back on my feet. I ran my finger along the edge of Mom's recipe card. She'd written with love at the bottom, followed by a tiny heart. Mom, who never failed to show up, even when her body began failing her. Mom, who Darren had abandoned to jet around the world building business connections that apparently amounted to nothing. How much? I asked, though I didn't know why. I had no intention of giving him a penny. $20,000. He said it like he was asking for $20. Just enough to get a new start. An apartment deposit, some business suits, networking events. You know how it is when you're rebuilding. I did know. After giving up my career, my apartment, and my plans for grad school to care for Mom, I'd rebuilt from nothing. No help from Darren. No acknowledgement of my sacrifice. What happened to your inheritance? I asked, my voice suddenly sharp. Mom had left us equal shares of what little she had. The house I now lived in had been split, with me buying out his half, plus some modest savings and her old jewelry. I'd used my portion to open Evelyn's Blooms, the small flower shop downtown that kept me afloat financially and spiritually. Mom had loved flowers. Every arrangement I created felt like a conversation with her. Investments, he said vaguely. They didn't work out. Through the phone, I heard city noises, honking, the rumble of a bus, people talking. Where was he?
Not that it mattered.
He'd always been somewhere else when it counted. Evie? His voice broke through my thoughts. Are you still there? I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only one I can turn to. Family helps family, right? The irony of his words stung like salt in an open wound. Family helps family. Where was that sentiment when Mom couldn't remember how to use a fork? Where was family when I sat alone in hospital waiting rooms, terrible coffee growing cold in my hands? I need to think about it, I finally said, knowing I was just delaying the inevitable no. Something in me, the little sister who once idolized her brother, couldn't bear to slam the door in his face.
Not yet.
Of course. Take your time. Relief flooded his voice. I'm staying at the West Side Motel for now. Room 118. Maybe we could meet up, catch up properly? Maybe, I said, though I knew I wouldn't go. After we hung up, I stood in the silent kitchen, the half-prepared lemon squares forgotten. Rain continued to fall outside, drumming against the roof of the house where I'd cared for our dying mother alone. The house where I'd learned to be both daughter and nurse, where I'd read to her when she could no longer read herself, where I'd shown her photos from my childhood when she couldn't remember who I was. The house where Darren should have been but wasn't. I picked up Mom's recipe card, tracing her handwriting with my fingertip. What would you do, Mom? I whispered to the empty kitchen. But I already knew the answer. She would forgive him, because that's who she was. And maybe that's why he thought he could waltz back into my life after 4 years of silence and ask for money. Because Mom always forgave him. But I wasn't Mom. I wasn't sure I could forgive at all. That night, sleep evaded me. Darren's voice echoed in my head, stirring memories I'd tried so hard to pack away. I kicked off the covers and padded to the spare bedroom, Mom's room during those final years. I hadn't changed much since she passed. Her quilt still draped across the bed, her reading glasses still perched on the nightstand as if she might reach for them at any moment. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the faded quilt pattern. The moonlight filtering through the curtains cast long shadows across the floor, much like the ones that had kept me company during countless sleepless nights of caregiving. It had started with small things 6 years ago. Mom putting her keys in the refrigerator, forgetting appointments, calling me by my aunt's name. I'd brushed it off as normal aging until the day she'd left the stove on and nearly burned down the kitchen. The diagnosis came shortly after, early onset Alzheimer's. She was only 62. I called Darren immediately after the doctor's appointment. He was in Barcelona at the time, something about a startup investment opportunity. It'll be fine, Evie, he'd said, his voice distant, the sounds of a bustling cafe in the background. Mom's tough. We'll get her the best care.
We.
That word haunted me now. There never was a we. Within weeks, it became clear that Mom needed full-time care. I was 39, working as an event planner at a hotel downtown, renting a cozy apartment with a view of the river, and taking night classes toward my MBA. I had a boyfriend, Michael, who had been hinting at engagement. I gave it all up. First came the job. I couldn't manage the unpredictable hours with Mom's doctor appointments and increasing needs. Then the apartment, too expensive on my reduced income. The classes went next. Finally, Michael, who said he understood but couldn't hide his disappointment as our relationship withered under the weight of my new responsibilities. I could fly home for a weekend, Darren offered during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. Give you a break. He never did. You're so good with her, he'd say whenever I described a particularly difficult day, Mom getting lost on a walk around the block, or the time she accused me of stealing her wedding ring that she'd hidden in the sugar canister. You're a natural caregiver, Evie. I'd just make things worse. Translation. I'm off the hook. I moved into Mom's house, sleeping on the couch for the first 3 months until I finally accepted this wasn't temporary and set up in the guest room. I learned to administer medications, to redirect her when she became agitated, to answer the same questions dozens of times without showing frustration. I learned to grieve someone who is still physically present but mentally slipping away. Darren sent flowers once, a lavish arrangement that arrived with a card. "Thinking of you both. Love, D." The flowers wilted and died. It was the only tangible support he offered. Meanwhile, I navigated the labyrinth of medical insurance, applied for benefits, researched clinical trials, and joined support groups. I learned medical terminology I never wanted to know and became fluent in the language of loss. The worst moments weren't the big ones, not when Mom forgot my birthday or called me by her sister's name. The worst were the fleeting instances of clarity when she'd look at me with sudden recognition, her eyes filling with tears as she grasped what was happening to her. "Where's Darren?" she'd ask during those lucid moments, and I'd make excuses. "He's working. He's traveling. He'll visit soon." I became expert at protecting both Mom and my absent brother, shielding her from the pain of his abandonment and him from confronting the reality of her decline. One evening, about 2 years into her illness, I was helping Mom into bed when she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You've given up so much, Evelyn," she said, clarity briefly illuminating her face. "I'm sorry. I haven't given up anything that matters," I lied, smoothing her silver hair. "Darren should be here," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." "I'm not alone. I have you," I said, the words catching in my throat. She shook her head slightly. "When I'm gone, don't let him take advantage of your kindness. Promise me." Before I could respond, the moment passed, and confusion clouded her eyes again. "Is it time for breakfast?" she asked, though it was nearly 9 at night. I never told Darren about that conversation. The medical bills mounted despite insurance. I took on freelance event planning when I could, working late into the night after Mom was asleep. Some months I chose between paying the heating bill and refilling her prescriptions. I always chose her medications. I called Darren once, swallowing my pride, when a particularly expensive treatment wasn't covered by insurance. "Things are tight right now, Evie," he'd said, the sounds of what seemed like a party in the background. "I'm between investments. Maybe next month." Next month never came. As I sat now in Mom's moonlit room, the weight of those years pressed down on me. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or financial strain, though both had been crushing. It was the profound loneliness of making life-altering decisions without support, of watching someone you love disappear piece by piece, of becoming invisible yourself, because caregivers often are. I'd aged a decade in those 4 years. The mirror showed new lines around my eyes, gray streaking through my once auburn hair. My friends had drifted away, unable to relate to my new reality. My career had stalled. While Darren traveled the world building connections, I'd built a fortress of medical knowledge and coping mechanisms. On my bedside table sat a photo of Mom and me from her last Christmas, her face thin but smiling as I helped her hang an ornament. Darren had sent a gift card and his regrets. The gift card had helped pay for her medications that month. I rose from Mom's bed and closed the door gently behind me, as if she might still be sleeping inside. Returning to my room, I picked up my phone and stared at Darren's text from earlier that evening. "Just checking in. Have you thought about what we discussed? I really need your help, sis. Family is all we've got."
Family.
The word tasted bitter now. Because while Darren had been building business connections across continents, I'd been building a different kind of connection, holding our mother's hand as she journeyed toward her end, carrying the weight that should have been shared between siblings, but instead had bent my shoulders alone. The morning of Mom's funeral dawned with inappropriate beauty. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across polished pews in the small chapel where Mom had attended services for decades. I'd been up since dawn, checking arrangements, greeting early arrivals, and trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest where grief had carved out a permanent residence. I hadn't heard from Darren in 3 weeks. Not since Mom took a sudden turn for the worse after pneumonia set in. Not during the endless nights at hospice, when I slept in a chair beside her bed, my hand holding hers even as she slipped further away. Not when I called to tell him she was gone. I'd left a voicemail with the funeral details, not expecting a response. So when I looked up from arranging white lilies on the altar, Mom's favorite, to see Darren striding down the aisle in an expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in a month at the flower shop, shock rendered me momentarily speechless. "Evie," he said, arms outstretched for a hug I didn't want to give but couldn't refuse in front of the early arrivals. His cologne was too strong, his embrace too brief. I caught the first flight I could. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He looked good, tanned, well-rested, his hair freshly cut. I caught my reflection in a brass candle holder. Pale, with dark circles under my eyes, hair hastily pinned back after another sleepless night. "The place looks nice," he continued, glancing around. Mom would have approved. I had spent hours with the funeral director, selecting everything from the casket lining to the hymns, using the small insurance policy Mom had maintained to give her the dignified farewell she deserved. All without input from my brother, who now surveyed the scene as if evaluating a business venue. "Pastor Wilson will begin at 11, I said, my voice flat. "You're giving the second eulogy." His eyebrows shot up. "Me? I didn't prepare anything." "I wrote something for you," I replied, handing him folded paper from my purse. "Since you weren't here, I thought you might need it." He took it, scanning the words I'd carefully crafted to make him sound like the devoted son he never was. "This is really good, Evie. Thank you." The service passed in a blur of hymns and readings. I delivered my eulogy from the heart, speaking of Mom's kindness, her courage during illness, her unwavering love. When Darren rose to speak, reading my words with theatrical emotion, something inside me hardened. Tears streamed down his face as he described moments he'd never witnessed, care he'd never provided, memories he'd never made. The congregation wept. Elderly women from Mom's garden club patted his arm afterward, murmuring how beautifully he'd spoken, how lucky Mom had been to have such devoted children. I smiled tightly and accepted condolences while Darren worked the room, accepting sympathy with practiced grace. It was at the reception in the church hall when the final straw broke. I was arranging leftover sandwiches to send home with elderly neighbors when Darren cornered me by the coffee urn. "Can we talk privately?" he asked, glancing around the thinning crowd. We stepped into the empty Sunday school room adjacent to the hall. Children's artwork decorated the walls, colorful handprints and lopsided crosses that Mom had once helped the kids create when she taught classes years ago. "I need to head back to Singapore tomorrow," he said without preamble. "Business can't wait, unfortunately." I nodded, unsurprised. "Of course." "But before I go," he hesitated, lowering his voice. "Did Mom leave anything in the house worth keeping? Jewelry, antiques? I should take my share now since I won't be around for the estate settlement." The coffee cup in my hand trembled slightly. "Your share? Well, yeah. Half is technically mine, right? The house, the contents." I set the cup down before I could throw it at him. "You want your share of Mom's things?
Now?
At her funeral reception?" He blinked, genuinely confused by my reaction. "I'm just being practical, Evie. I can't keep flying back and forth for this stuff." "This stuff," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You mean the furniture she polished every Sunday? The photo albums she preserved? The china she saved for special occasions that never came because she was too sick?" "Don't get emotional," he said, his tone condescending. "I'm just asking about valuables." Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped. "Valuables? You want to know about value? Do you know what's valuable, Darren?" Sitting beside Mom during chemo treatments, reading to her when her eyes got too tired, learning how to cook her favorite meals when she couldn't hold a spatula anymore, watching old movies together on nights she couldn't sleep because of a pain. He took a step back, startled by my outburst. "Those were the valuables," I continued, my voice rising despite myself. "And you missed every single one of them. You weren't there when she forgot my name for the first time. You weren't there when she cried because she couldn't remember our father's face. You weren't there when she begged me not to put her in a nursing home." "I sent money," he protested weakly.
Once.
"You sent money once, and it barely covered a week of her medications." I laughed bitterly. But you know what? You showed up today and cried the loudest. Congratulations on your performance. His face darkened. That's not fair, Evie. I loved Mom too. Love isn't a feeling, Darren. It's showing up. It's sacrifice. It's doing what needs to be done even when it's hard. Before he could respond, Pastor Wilson poked his head in. Everything all right in here? Fine, I said, straightening my black dress. Darren was just leaving. After the last guest departed, I stood alone in the reception hall, surrounded by empty plates and half-drunk cups of coffee. Darren had left without saying goodbye, though he'd managed to slip Mom's pearl necklace into his pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. I let him take it. The pearls were worthless costume jewelry, though he'd never know the difference. That evening, I returned to Mom's empty house, my house now, and wandered through rooms still echoing with her absence. In her bedroom, I opened her jewelry box and removed the hidden compartment at the bottom where she'd kept her real treasures: Grandma's diamond earrings, her own wedding band, the gold locket with photos of Darren and me as children. I know what you'd say, Mom, I whispered to the silent room. You'd tell me to forgive him, to share these with him. But as I closed the jewelry box, I realized something with startling clarity. That day at the funeral, watching Darren cry crocodile tears and then ask about valuables wasn't just another disappointment. It was confirmation. My brother wasn't grieving our mother. He was looting memories I'd earned with sweat and tears. And I was done making excuses for him. Life after Mom's funeral unfolded in slow, deliberate steps. The lawyer handling Mom's modest estate explained that the house was jointly left to Darren and me, along with her savings, roughly $30,000 split between us. I used my inheritance as a down payment to buy out Darren's share of the house. He signed the papers without hesitation, eager for the cash. The transaction was our last communication for 4 years. Rebuilding came in stages. First, I had to remember who I was before becoming a caregiver. I'd spent so long being Mom's daughter, Mom's nurse, Mom's advocate that I'd forgotten what it meant to just be Evelyn. 3 months after the funeral, I stood in Mom's garden, overgrown with spring wildflowers she'd planted the autumn before her diagnosis. Kneeling in the soft earth, I began to pull weeds, separate perennials, and carve order from the beautiful chaos she'd left behind. What would you plant here? I asked aloud, a habit I'd developed, talking to Mom as if she might answer. The spring breeze rustled through the cherry tree she'd loved, showering me with pale pink petals. I took it as her response. The next day, I walked into First National Bank with a business plan. 2 months later, with a small business loan and Mom's life insurance money, I opened Evelyn's Blooms in a narrow storefront downtown. I painted the walls butter yellow, Mom's favorite color, and stenciled her favorite saying above the register: "Bloom where you are planted." The shop became my salvation. I channeled grief into creativity, arranging flowers for weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, and yes, funerals. Each arrangement felt like a conversation with Mom, who had taught me the language of flowers before I could read. Lilies for remembrance, daisies for innocence, roses for all the shades of love. On quiet mornings, I'd sit at the workbench in the back room, sunlight streaming through high windows, and feel something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the gentle acknowledgement that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of creating beauty despite loss. I kept Mom's picture on my nightstand, her face forever captured in a moment before illness claimed her, smiling, vibrant, her arm around my shoulders at my cousin's wedding. Sometimes I'd wake in the night, grief rising like a tide, and I'd tell her about my day, my customers, the funny thing the delivery guy said, as if continuing our daily conversations. "I miss you," I'd whisper to her photograph, "but I'm doing okay." And slowly it became true. I made new friends, real ones who didn't disappear when things got difficult. There was Eleanor, 72, who ordered fresh flowers every Friday just because, and eventually started bringing me coffee and homemade scones during her visits. Marcus, the bookstore owner next door, who recommended novels and kept an eye on my shop when I needed a break. Sarah, a young widow who ordered arrangements for her husband's grave and eventually became my part-time assistant. They formed a constellation of connection around me, these people who hadn't known me during the years of caregiving, but somehow understood that I was healing from something profound. Dating came later. I met Richard at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. He owned the frame shop 3 blocks from my store. Our first date was awkward, both of us rusty at romance, but his patience and genuine interest broke through the walls I'd built. By our 5th date, I found myself laughing freely for the first time in years. "You have the most beautiful laugh," he told me that night. "Like you've been saving it up." Perhaps I had been. There were setbacks along the way. The anniversary of Mom's death sent me spiraling into a weekend of tears and isolation. A customer who reminded me of her, the same perfume, similar mannerisms, left me shaking in the storage room after she left. The first Christmas without her, I closed the shop for a week and couldn't bring myself to put up a tree. But there were triumphs too. When Evelyn's Blooms was featured in the local newspaper's Small Business Spotlight, I traced Mom's name in the article, mentioned as my inspiration. When I paid off the last of her medical bills, I opened a bottle of champagne and toasted her memory. When I finally cleaned out her closet and donated her clothes to the women's shelter, keeping only her favorite cardigan, I felt her approval like sunshine on my face. Throughout it all, Darren remained a ghost, his absence a presence of its own. Sometimes I'd see something that reminded me of him, a commercial for an airline he'd mentioned, or a man with the same swagger walking down the street, and feel a pang of something. Not quite loss, not quite anger. Perhaps just recognition of the empty space where a brother should have been. I heard snippets about him through distant relatives. He was in Hong Kong. No, Melbourne. Starting a tech company. No, importing luxury goods. Each update more grandiose than the last, each one reminding me that while I was putting down roots, Darren was still chasing the horizon. In the quiet evenings, tending to Mom's garden, my garden now, I sometimes wondered if he ever thought of us. If he missed the family we'd once been, before ambition and absence hollowed him out. If he remembered Mom's laugh or the way she'd sing off-key to the radio while making Sunday breakfast. These thoughts came less frequently as years passed. My life filled with other things, the shop's growth, community involvement, friends, Richard's increasingly important presence. I sponsored a flower arranging class at the senior center, where Mom had once volunteered. I mentored a bright, ambitious girl named Zoe, who reminded me of myself at 20, eager to learn the business, full of creative energy and hope. "You've built something special here," Richard said one evening as he helped me close the shop, his arms encircling my waist from behind while I counted the day's receipts. "I have, haven't I?" I leaned back against him, surveying the shop that had become my second home. "She would be proud," he murmured, knowing exactly who I was thinking of. That night, I added a note to my will, leaving the shop to Zoe when I was gone. The house would go to Alzheimer's research. There was no mention of Darren. It wasn't revenge, it was reality. We were strangers now, connected only by shared DNA and fading memories of a woman who had loved us both, despite our different ways of loving her back. And then, 4 years after Mom's funeral, on a rainy afternoon in April, my phone rang, and Darren's name appeared on the screen. After that initial phone call from Darren, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floors of Mom's house, my house, restless with memories and resentment. His request for $20,000 echoed in my mind, each repetition fueling a slow-burning anger that had been banked but never extinguished. The following morning, I opened the shop early, seeking refuge in routine. The meditative act of trimming stems and arranging blooms usually centered me, but today my hands trembled slightly as I worked on a birthday arrangement of sunflowers and blue delphinium. My phone buzzed on the counter. Darren again. "Just checking in. Have you thought about my request? It's pretty urgent, sis." I set down my shears, staring at the message. The casualness of it, as if he were asking to borrow a sweater, not thousands of dollars, made something twist inside me. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, coming through the back door with fresh coffee. My assistant had become attuned to my moods over the years. "My brother's back," I said simply. Her eyebrows rose. Sarah knew the outlines of my history with Darren, the abandonment, the funeral, the years of silence. What does he want?
Money.
$20,000. She whistled low. That's specific. And not happening, I replied, tucking my phone away without responding. But Darren was persistent. By afternoon, he'd called twice more and left a voicemail that managed to sound both desperate and entitled. Evie, I really need your help here. I've got people counting on me. This is a temporary setback. I'll pay you back double once my new venture takes off. We're family. This is what family does. I deleted the message and finished my day at the shop, but his words followed me home, clinging like the scent of lilies that never quite washed from my hands. That evening, Richard came over with takeout and a sympathetic ear. We sat on the porch swing Mom had loved, the spring air warm around us. Maybe you should meet with him, Richard suggested gently, his arm around my shoulders. Hear him out. I stiffened.
Why?
So he can manipulate me in person instead of over the phone? No, he said, his voice calm. So you can look him in the eye and say no. Get closure. Otherwise, he'll keep haunting you. I considered Richard's words as night settled over the garden. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I needed to face Darren, to speak my truth to him directly rather than avoiding the confrontation. The next morning, I texted Darren, "Meet me at Riverside Park. 1 p.m. The bench near the old oak." He responded immediately, "I'll be there." "Thanks, sis. You're the best." The park had been one of Mom's favorite places. We'd taken her there during her better days, when the disease granted temporary reprieves. She'd sit on that bench, watching children play and commenting on the flowering trees. It felt right to have this conversation in a place that held her memory. I arrived early, watching joggers and dog walkers enjoy the spring sunshine. At precisely 1 o'clock, Darren appeared, looking more disheveled than I'd expected. His designer clothes were slightly rumpled, his usually immaculate hair unkempt. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Evie," he said, approaching with arms outstretched for a hug. I stayed seated, offering only a nod in greeting. After a moment's awkwardness, he sat beside me, leaving careful space between us. "Thanks for meeting me," he began, his voice carrying the smooth, practiced charm I remembered. "I know it's been a while." "For years," I said flatly. He winced.
Yeah. Look, I'm sorry about that.
Life got complicated and... "Life is always complicated, Darren," I interrupted. "That's not why you disappeared. You disappeared because it was easier than showing up." He blinked and used this directness from me. The sister he remembered had been accommodating, understanding, always making excuses for him. That sister was gone. "I made mistakes," he admitted, looking at his hands. "I should have been there for Mom."
For you.
"Yes," I agreed. "You should have." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant laughter of children on the playground. "About the money," he finally said, shifting to the real purpose of our meeting. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I've hit a rough patch, but I've got this incredible opportunity. A friend in Singapore has connections too. What happened to Mom's inheritance?" I cut in. "She left you $15,000. The money from selling your half of the house was another $80,000. Where did it all go?" He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Investments. Some didn't pan out." "What kind of investments?" "It's complicated. Try me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair.
Fine.
"Some bad business deals. And I had some gambling issues for a while. But I'm past that now." The admission hung between us. I thought of Mom in her final years, carefully counting out pills because we couldn't afford the full prescription at once. I thought of working 2 jobs while caring for her, of the small indignities of poverty that had become our daily reality while Darren gambled away his inheritance. "I'm not giving you $20,000, I said quietly. "Evie, please." "I wouldn't ask if." "If what? If you weren't desperate?" "That's the only time you ever reach out, Darren. When you need something." His expression hardened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you called just to check on me? When was the last time you remembered my birthday? When Mom was dying, When was the last time you offered to sit with her so I could get a full night's sleep? He had no answer. Did you know I had to drop out of my MBA program to care for her? That I lost my apartment? My relationship? That there were nights I chose between buying food and buying her medication? I didn't. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't want to know. He looked genuinely stricken for the first time. I'm sorry, Evie. I really am. But I can change. I want to do better. For a brief moment, I almost believed him. The little sister in me, the one who had once idolized her big brother, wanted to believe that people could change, that relationships could heal. But then I remembered Mom's words during that rare moment of clarity. Don't let him take advantage of your kindness. Promise me. I stood up. I need to get back to the shop. Wait, he said, desperation edging into his voice. Just think about it.
Please.
I have nowhere else to turn. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman he pretended to be, nor the heartless abandoner I'd painted in my mind, but simply a man who had made choices. Choices that had led him here, to this bench, begging his sister for money he hadn't earned and didn't deserve. I have thought about it, I said softly. Every night Mom cried out in pain. Every time she didn't recognize me. Every moment I stood alone between life and death for her. I've had years to think about it, Darren. I walked away, his calls fading behind me. When I reached my car, I took out my phone and typed the coldest text I've ever sent. You're on your own now. Then I drove to my lawyer's office and removed Darren's name from my will. Walking out of the lawyer's office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Removing Darren from my will wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. Freedom from obligation. Freedom from the emotional debt I'd carried for so long. Freedom to choose where my legacy would go when I was gone. The lawyer, Mrs. Patel, had asked me the usual questions about my decision, making sure I understood what I was doing. And who would you like to name instead? She'd asked, fingers poised over her keyboard. Without hesitation, I'd replied, half to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation in Elaine Peterson's name. That's my mother. And half to Zoe Winters. When she asked for clarification about Zoe, I smiled. She's the daughter I never had. It was true. In the 4 years since Mom's passing, 25-year-old Zoe had become more than just my employee. She had the same passion for flowers that Mom and I had shared, the same intuitive understanding of what each arrangement needed to say when words failed. More importantly, she showed up not just for work, but for life. For the hard days when grief ambushed me. For the celebrations when the shop won community awards. For the ordinary Tuesdays when we shared lunch and dreams in the back room. Driving back to the shop, I thought about how Darren would react when he discovered what I'd done. He'd be angry, certainly.
Hurt, possibly.
But I found I no longer cared about his reactions. My emotional well-being was no longer tied to his approval or understanding. The next morning, I woke to a barrage of texts from Darren. You can't just cut me off like this. I'm your brother. Your only family. Mom would be ashamed of you. That last one stung, but only briefly. Because I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that Mom would understand. In her final moments of clarity, she had seen Darren for who he truly was, not who she had wished him to be. I deleted the messages without responding and got ready for work. It was Saturday, our busiest day at the shop, and I had 3 wedding consultations scheduled. When I arrived, Zoe was already there, brewing coffee and prepping buckets of fresh roses that had been delivered at dawn. Morning, boss, she greeted me, her smile bright despite the early hour. I put Mrs. Hernandez's anniversary arrangement in the cooler. 40 years married. Can you imagine? I thought of my parents, who'd only had 23 years together before Dad's heart attack. Of Mom, who never remarried because, as she'd once told me, when you've had the best, anyone else would be settling. It's something special. I agreed, hanging up my jacket. Speaking of special, I've got something to tell you later. After closing. Zoe raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That was another thing I loved about her. She understood the value of waiting, of letting moments ripen in their own time. The day unfolded in a blur of customers and consultations. I found myself enjoying the simple pleasure of matching flowers to occasions, to personalities, to unspoken emotions. A young man buying his first corsage for his prom date. An elderly woman selecting flowers for her husband's grave. A new mother choosing a bouquet to celebrate her child's birth. Each transaction a story, each arrangement a verse in the ongoing poem of human connection. Darren called twice more. I ignored both calls, sending the second straight to voicemail. By closing time, the shop was peaceful again, the day's chaos replaced with the sweet, lingering scent of flowers and the satisfaction of work well done. Zoe looked up from the final receipts as I locked the front door. So, what did you want to tell me? I gestured to the small table in the back room where we sometimes ate lunch. Let's sit. We settled in with cups of tea, the evening sun slanting through the high windows, turning dust motes to gold. I changed my will yesterday, I began. Her brow furrowed. Are you okay? You're not sick or anything? I laughed softly. No, nothing like that. I'm perfectly healthy. But I wanted you to know that when I'm gone, hopefully many, many years from now, this shop will be yours. Her eyes widened, filling with unexpected tears. Evie, I can't. You can, I said firmly. And you will. You love this place almost as much as I do. You understand what we do here isn't just about selling flowers. It's about marking the moments that matter. The way Mom taught me. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, too overwhelmed to speak. In that moment, I realized that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up, who stays, who sees you at your most vulnerable and doesn't look away. Darren had never been that person, but Zoe was. Richard was. Eleanor and Marcus and Sarah were. The constellation of connection I'd built after Mom's death. That was my real family. Later that evening, as Richard and I walked through Mom's garden, our garden, in the gentle twilight, I told him about changing my will. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked, not because I doubted my decision, but because I valued his perspective. He considered the question seriously the way he always did. I think you honored what matters most to you. That's always the right thing. We paused beneath the cherry tree, now heavy with spring blossoms. I remembered planting it with Mom when I was 10, her hands guiding mine as we patted soil around the slender sapling. It will outlive us both, she'd said, but that's the point of planting trees. We do it for those who come after us. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Darren again, no doubt. I ignored it, focusing instead on the garden, on Richard's hand in mine, on the future I was choosing rather than the past I couldn't change. Removing Darren from my will wasn't about punishment. It was about legacy, about ensuring that what I left behind would nurture growth, not entitlement, would honor love, not obligation. Mom had taught me how deep betrayal could go. The slow erosion of trust as Darren chose absence over presence, time after time. The sharp pain of watching him use grief as a performance at her funeral, then immediately ask about valuables. But she had also taught me love. The quiet devotion of showing up day after day. The strength found in vulnerability. The peace that comes from living according to your deepest values, even when, especially when it's difficult. In the end, I chose her legacy, not his. And in that choice, I finally found the closure I'd been seeking since the day she died. Peace, it turns out, tastes like freedom. Like cherry blossoms on the evening breeze. Like the quiet certainty that some bonds, once broken, are better left that way, while others, chosen with care and tended with love, can bloom even in the shadow of loss.